Welcome to Sprinkles at the Cinema. Today is a special episode for my birthday. Ooh. I had seen other creators do similar lists, and it seemed like a lot of fun, so I thought I would give it a shot. So essentially what this is I choose a favorite movie from every year of my life. So we begin in 1978.
I'm centuries old.
There were actually a lot of good choices that year. The Deer Hunter came out in 78, and Halloween, of course, and Grease. But ultimately, I had to go with The Wiz because I am a lifelong Michael Jackson fan. And back when I saw The Wizard of Oz, actually, the Scarecrow was my favorite character. So then when I found out about the existence of The Wiz and that Michael played the Scarecrow, that was huge for me. So I kind of didn't have much other choice but to choose The Wiz for 1978. Now for 1979, I kind of had the opposite problem where there really weren't a lot of films I liked that came out that year. So I went with All That Jazz, which is kind of a semi-autobiographical film by Bob Fosse, and it stars Roy Scheider. I've actually only seen it a couple of times, so it might seem like an odd choice, but here we are. For 1980, I chose The Blues Brothers, which is actually one of my husband's very favorite films, and it was one of my mother's as well. So I've had a lot of exposure to it over the years. And so when I looked at a list of 1980 movies, I went, oh, well, for 1981, this is going to be hilarious if you saw my video about my childhood trauma related to this film, An American Werewolf in London. I couldn't really see anything else from 1981 that resonated with me in any kind of way, and so I went with this. Now, this might be one of the more predictable choices on my list, but for 1982, I went with E.T., the Extraterrestrial. Everyone in my age group was completely obsessed with that movie, and I am no exception. For 1983, I'm going to toss in an honorable mention first, which is Michael Jackson's Thriller. It is a short film, and I will die on that hill. There were also some other good ones that year, like A Christmas Story and Psycho 2, which is an underrated sequel, I must say. Ultimately, for 1983, I have to go with John Carpenter's Christine, which is based on the book by Stephen King. For 1984, I had to go with Ghostbusters. Now, my actual favorite back then was The Muppets Take Manhattan. But unfortunately, I haven't really rewatched that much in the years since, so we're going with Ghostbusters. For 1985, I considered nothing else. It is Pee-wee's Big Adventure. It's another one of those I rewatched a lot as a kid. I am just really attached to it. And, Phil Hartman co-wrote it, so what's not to love, right? For 1986, the film I watched the most from that year is probably An American Tail, but ultimately I had to go with Stand By Me. It's just one of those films from Gen X that's sort of essential viewing, especially for the tail end of Gen X like me. So, 1987 should come as absolutely no surprise. It is The Princess Bride, hence the shirt. There was really nothing else in the running. Now, 1988, I was actually a little torn between Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Coming to America. I sided with Coming to America just because it ranks higher in my top 50. I was probably too young to watch Coming to America, but no harm, no foul, I suppose. Once you strip away the profanity, it's actually a really wholesome story. So, in 1989, I was torn once again between Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Parenthood. I had to side with Parenthood. It was my first exposure to Diane Wiest, who is my favorite actress, and so that kind of edged it out. What's funny is that Keanu Reeves is in both of them, so I guess he had a pretty good year in 89. For 1990, I chose Edward Scissorhands, which is another Diane Wiest film. Also in consideration were Misery and Ghost, because I was really fond of both of those, but I had to go with my gut. Now, 1991 is a bit complicated because at the time, my favorite movie was New Jack City. But over the years, I would say my favorite 1991 has become The Silence of the Lambs. Now, 1992, this one actually took quite a while to decide. A lot of films I loved came out that year, like School Ties, Wayne's World, but I went with A League of Their Own, which was my introduction to David Strathairn, who I recently did an episode about. For 1993, I almost went with Philadelphia because it's just such a great film, but the film that had more of an impact on me personally was Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit. That sounds silly, but it's true. That film made me want to go out and sing, so I did. I literally joined 2 choirs the summer after I saw this movie. 1994 was a very hard decision. In fact, I have several listed here because I figured I would just decide on the fly. So the cool answer is The Shawshank Redemption, of course. But for me, the real answer is The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. In the running were also Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, Reality Bites. So 94 was kind of a stacked year for me. For 1995, I had to go with Babe. As with Sister Act 2, Babe actually changed my life. I have not eaten pork since 1995. 1996 was possibly the hardest choice on this list because the 2 films I have seen the most times both came out that year. The Birdcage and That Thing You Do. But as you can see, The Birdcage is in my 4 favorites. So ultimately, I had to go with The Birdcage. 1997. I originally chose Liar Liar when I started making this list like a year ago. But very recently, I fell in love with LA Confidential. So I'm choosing LA Confidential. 1998 was a bit complicated as well. One of my favorite Adrian Brody films, Restaurant, came out in 98, as did Small Soldiers, which was kind of a big deal because of Phil Hartman's passing and the impact that had on me. But I went with The Wedding Singer because it's the one I've seen the most times out of all of those. In the running for 1999 was The Green Mile, The Sixth Sense, and Office Space. I had to go with 10 Things I Hate About You. That might seem like an odd choice with the others in contention, but you kind of have to be in a really specific headspace for something like The Green Mile, so 10 Things I Hate About You is more of an anytime kind of movie. For the year 2000, I had to go with Christopher Guest's Best in Show. It's a mockumentary about dog shows and the unique people who participate in them. And it's just so funny and it's so rewatchable. And so I had to go with that. We'll do a little shorthand here. 2001, 2002, 2003, The Lord of the Rings trilogy. For 2004, I was a little torn between The Village and Mean Girls. I went with Mean Girls just because, as I said with 10 Things I Hate About You, it's more of an anytime kind of movie. For 2005, I chose The Jacket, which is an Adrian Brody film. In case you didn't know, he is my favorite actor. For 2006, I considered a few, such as Hollywoodland, another Adrian Brody film, the second of his I ever saw, actually. Ultimately, I went with Little Miss Sunshine. You might notice a trend here where I'm going with the more light-hearted options. For 2007, I had to go with The Darjeeling Limited, which is the first Wes Anderson film I ever saw, and it still battles for my favorite with The Grand Budapest Hotel. One of my favorite animated films of all time also came out in 2007, which is Meet the Robinsons, which I consider a very underrated Disney film. Like, if you go to the parks, there's no merch for Meet the Robinsons. So I think a lot of people forget it exists, but it's fantastic. For 2008, I had to go with The Brothers Bloom. Yes, yet another Adrian Brody movie. This one was directed by Rian Johnson. It's kind of a con men type of movie like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. It also stars Mark Ruffalo, Rachel Weisz, and Rinko Kikuchi. and the late great Robbie Coltrane from the Harry Potter franchise. For 2009, I have actually not chosen yet between 17 Again and Fantastic Mr. Fox. Now, Fantastic Mr. Fox, I think I have probably seen more times, and it's actually higher up on my top 50 on Letterboxd. But 17 Again it just has part of my heart, especially since Matthew Perry's passing. So I guess I have to go with Fantastic Mr. Fox. But just know 17 Again is a very close second. For 2010, the cool answer is Inception, of course. However, I have to be honest with myself and choose Easy A. It is a film I rewatch often. My daughter also likes it, so we watch it together a lot. It's just one of those movies you can just put on, and you have a good time. For 2011, I was torn between two Adrien Brody films, which are Detachment and Midnight in Paris. Ultimately, I prefer Midnight in Paris, so I went with that. Detachment, again, as with some other things I mentioned, is kind of a heavy movie. You have to be in the right headspace. You have to give it your full attention. Whereas Midnight in Paris is more light. Detachment is, however, a powerful film, and Adrien gives a fantastic performance, so I would still recommend it if you haven't seen it. For 2012, I was going to go with Life of Pi. That's what I initially wrote down when I started working on this list ages ago. However, in recent weeks, I saw Lincoln, which also came out that year. And this is a recency bias, I suppose, but I'm going to go with Lincoln. For 2013, this is going to be kind of an unusual choice. The Incredible Burt Wonderstone. And it's basically about magicians and the changing times and, how the styles change and if you can keep up with that or get left behind. It's actually a lot more touching than you would think on the surface. And it's just a great film. For 2014, there's really no other option but The Grand Budapest Hotel. It's currently my favorite Adrien Brody movie, my favorite Wes Anderson movie, and it's in my Letterboxd for favorites. For 2015, I chose Backtrack, which is yet another Adrien Brody movie. You're starting to see why my other channel is all about him, aren't you? Backtrack is one of his more underrated projects. It has kind of a horror thriller feel to it, a lot of supernatural aspects, heartbreaking moments. I think it's a well-rounded story, and I recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. For 2016, this is kind of a controversial choice at this point because of the creator of this project. However, I had to choose Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. It was the film I looked forward to most that year. I was the most excited about it. And so I had to go with that. Now, 2017 is a bit of a hard choice because both Get Out and Lady Bird came out in 2017. I adore both of them. I grew up in Sacramento, California, so Lady Bird really resonated with me. It was set during the time where I was around that age also. And so it was just so relatable. Her mother is even very similar to mine. So, Lady Bird is kind of the sentimental choice, I suppose. But ultimately, I'm going to have to go with Get Out. 2018, we have another Fantastic Beasts movie, The Crimes of Grindelwald. It was just the film I was the most jazzed to see that year. I went to see it in the theater, and it was just a great experience. So I had to go with that. For 2019, I went with Once Upon a Time in... For 2020, I went with One Night in Miami. This is a great film about the friendship between Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Sam Cooke, and Jim Brown. And it basically covers one night in Miami where they all hung out together. and all the things they discussed. And it's just a great film. For 2021, I went with The French Dispatch of the Liberty, Kansas Evening Sun, which I saw in the theater twice. It is a Wes Anderson film that Adrian Brody is in. So shocking. For 2022, I was kind of torn between Fantastic Beasts, The Secrets of Dumbledore, and See How They Run, which is yet another Adrian Brody film. Ultimately, I think I have to go with Fantastic Beasts. I have to be honest with myself. That was my favorite film that year. For 2023, you are fully expecting me to say Asteroid City right now, aren't you? But surprise, surprise, it's actually American Fiction. What's funny is Jeffrey Wright is in both of those movies. For 2024, I had to go with Wick. And finally, for 2025, you're assuming I'm going to say The Brutalist, but I'm not. I'm going with The Phoenician Scheme, another Wes Anderson film. Don't get me wrong, The Brutalist was a great film, but The Brutalist is quite a heavy experience. So The Phoenician Scheme is something that I can see myself rewatching a little more often. So that's it. Thank you for hanging in there. I know it was a long list because I've been around a long time. Thank you for joining me. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.